Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Stephen R. Soukup, and he published a book in February 2021. Title of the book is The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, How Political Correctness Captured Big Business. Very important topic, very important subject. Read through the book. I learned a lot. I knew some of it, but definitely some of the more kind of capital markets, financial stuff I really wasn't familiar with, but he can talk more about that. So Stephen R. Soukup, are you there?
I'm here, William. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not know your background, can you talk about your background and what led you to write this book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital?
I started out working in the capital markets in Washington research almost exactly 25 years ago. In fact, it was 25 years ago last week. Right out of graduate school, I took a job with Prudential Securities Washington Research Office, which was at the time the #1 rated Washington office in Institutional Investors Magazine and was considered among the best shops around for providing information about what is going on in Washington and how it might affect capital markets for large Wall Street investors. Within a few years, we found ourselves sort of on the outs at Prudential. And part of the reason for that is because we continued to sort of toe the line on what we believe to be traditional virtues and traditional values in capital markets, which at the time was not all that popular. It was becoming less and less of an issue of focus among some Wall Street firms, including the one that we worked for. And before long, we found ourselves out on the streets. My boss, Mark Melcher, was fired by Prudential with a specific reason given by the firm that his views no longer meshed with the views of the firm. In fact, that's what they wrote exactly on the form that they filed with the NASD explaining why he was terminated, that his views no longer meshed with the views of the firm. And
what year was that, Stephen?
That was 2000. In fact, they took the top-ranked Washington analyst, Melcher, 2 weeks before the 2000 election, which at the time was the most incredible election ever, and fired him because he was concerned about ethics and virtues in investing, and the new management of the firm had sort of had enough of that. So that was our first indication that there was trouble on Wall Street with respect to what we would call traditionalism, traditional virtues, and traditional capital markets. We spent a couple of years after that over at Lehman Brothers. And while our immediate supervisor at Lehman was fantastic, the firm's management wasn't always so thrilled with the things that we had to say. Specifically, whenever we wrote about China and whenever we tried to explain to our clients the risks involved investing in the People's Republic of China, our pieces generally were rejected by firm management on the recommendation of their investment bankers, who, as it turns out, were doing business in China with the very people we were criticizing, and they didn't want us screwing up deals. So it was only a couple of years at Lehman before we decided that we could no longer be honest with our clients, that we could no longer fairly represent what we believe to be the risks in the capital markets. And so we started our own firm, an independent research provider known as the Political Forum. That business has been functional and has been providing honest, earnest assessment of the risks posed to capital markets by politics and geopolitics for the last 18 years. And that's where we have developed our beliefs about what matters and what matters specifically with respect to ethics in investing. About 2, maybe 3 years ago, I met a group of people in Washington who were more on the think tank side of things, who were doing some work on what we now understand, what we now know as ESG, or environmental, social, and governance investing, activist investing. And as I became more and more familiar with them, I became more and more familiar with the case they were making against this activist investment. Justin Danhoff, who runs a free enterprise project for the National Center on Public Policy, kindly came and gave a presentation to our clients, and it was a stunning presentation. What he told me, what he told us, what he told our clients was stuff that we had not even considered, that we did not know, that we did not understand about just how thoroughly some of our colleagues in the financial services world, just how thoroughly they were trying to politicize the capital markets, trying to weaponize capital to be used for political ends. And these are people who had been in the business for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases, who were unaware of what was going on behind the scenes. So at that point in time, I decided that I should dedicate myself to finding out more about this, to investigating the causes of it, to investigating how it conflicted with what we believe to be the ethical foundations of capitalism and of free and fair capital markets. And so from that point, the book became a project that I definitely wanted to work on, that I definitely wanted to share with, at the very least, people in financial services. And through the graces of Encounter Books, I've been able to share it with a much larger audience.
Well, it's really a fascinating book, really important. And you start off in the introduction explaining what ESG is, but also just how recent these changes have happened. And I think, and if you look at the larger, spectrum of all politics, the financial markets is one where everything's becoming woke. But these financial things, it makes them, you called it kind of a kindler, gentler Gordon Gekko, these kind of woke ideas. Can you talk about some of these characters that are really more recent, like Larry Fink or Jamie Dimon, that maybe people may not be as familiar with?
Right. In the introduction to the book, I use those two players in the capital markets specifically to describe the two types of woke investors. The first, as you mentioned, is Larry Fink. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock Incorporated, which is the largest asset management firm in the world, with roughly $10 trillion in assets under management. It's a massive company. It is a massive influence on capital markets. It's a massive influence on the companies it holds. And because the overwhelming majority of its investments are in passive investments, in exchange traded funds, index funds, et cetera, it holds all companies. So it's not just a financial services firm that would have a very narrow influence. It has very wide, very broad, and very deep influence. Fink, over the last couple of years, has made it explicit to his investors, to his clients, and to the CEOs of the corporations that they hold, that he believes that sustainability, which is the idea of preparing for a zero carbon future, is the single most important factor to look for in deciding which companies to invest in and which companies to support wholeheartedly. So essentially what he has done is taken 200 years of capital markets practice where, pecuniary matters are the most important features that investors look for in companies that they put their money in, and thrown that out the window and decided that sustainability should be the most important factor. So he's clearly very much on the radical edge of a change in capitalism and a change in capital markets. Jamie Dimon, by contrast, I describe in the book as sort of the St. Augustine of woke investing, the St. Augustine of ESG. He has seen how well Larry Fink has done. He has seen just how powerful ESG can be, and he's decided to get in on the gravy train while he can. And he's done that, and he continues to push JP Morgan in that direction. But whereas Fink is a true believer in the power of capital markets to change the world and to improve the world and to make things a much better and happier place, Dimon, I believe, is simply in it because he sees how it can change JP Morgan and how it can line his pockets.
And it's very expedient because it makes people look less maybe crass and greedy. You use those terms in the intro, and you definitely reference Voltaire, where you say EHG promises the best of all possible worlds, kind of like
Yes, it does.
I think it was Pangloss who said that, and Voltaire. Yeah. And so, but I mean, you just see this change. It's fairly recent. I mean, you could say that the capital markets may be purely capitalistic, but there's still been a matter of morality in some and allowances for that in some capital markets. But now this wokeism, would you say that it's much more authoritarian, that you really have to follow this, or that they're trying, like you said, I think that Fink is, and I mean, your intro was pretty surprising because the head of the Fed allowed Fink to manage their portfolio, which to me was pretty shocking.
Yeah, well, that one of the benefits that comes with being the largest and best known asset management firm in the world is that you not only have connections, but you're known as the largest and best asset management firm in the world. And so in 2020, when the Fed and the Treasury were struggling to figure out what to do about the crash in the markets due to COVID and what to do about what they saw as a very serious risk to both the capital markets and to the economy more broadly, they enlisted Fink's help and they enlisted BlackRock's help in managing the programs that they put together. So essentially, this evangelical sustainability guru became the partner of the Federal Reserve and of the United States federal government in 2020 as part of the government's reaction to COVID-19. So it's very uncomfortable for those of us who know who Fink is, what he believes, and what he intends to do with capital markets. As for the ethics in business and in capital markets, I think it's important to remember that capital markets have always had, and capitalism itself has always had, sort of an ethical framework in which it operates. This dates back to Adam Smith. This is Adam Smith's invisible hand, this idea that there is a set of virtues that tends to be interwoven into society, into capital markets, that enables capitalism to function. And without this ethical framework, without these virtues being part of society, the system falls apart. What the ESG movement has done, what the stakeholder capitalism movement has done, is to replace those traditional virtues with new virtues, with a new set of values that they believe are more important than those traditional values and are more effectively part of the current environment and can deal with the challenges of the 21st century more effectively. So the ethics idea is that there's always been an ethical component to this. What they've done is change the very nature of what that ethical component is.
Right. And that's very important. Can you help define to the listener the difference between a shareholder, which most people have heard of, and this new term stakeholder?
Well, a shareholder, obviously, is somebody who owns the company or owns portions of the company. You own the shares of the company. A shareholder is somebody who has taken their money, their capital, and invested it, given it to the company to say, hey, do with this to make your company bigger and better and to make your products, to do your business, and return it to me with some sort of interest. Whether that's a growth, whether that's dividends or a growth in the price of the share or whatever. This is, a traditional arrangement where an investor gives somebody some money and says, do with it what you need and bring it back to me with a little more than I gave you. That's a shareholder. A stakeholder is somebody who is invested in the company in a more metaphorical way. An employee of the company, the customers of the company, the city in which the company operates, the environment around the factories or the headquarters where the company is, and the environment more broadly. Those are the stakeholders of the company. Those are the people who are affected by the company, whether they want to be or not. In the 1960s, SRI, the
Stanford Research Institute.
Yes, the Management Institute at Stanford Business developed the idea of stakeholder capitalism as a descriptive term, not as a normative
Right. Not to be applied in reality, I guess, is what you're right.
Right. It was simply their way of explaining what a successful business does. If you're going to be in business for long, you have to be concerned about your shareholders, but you also have to be concerned about your employees. You can't have employees who are unhappy with their jobs or think that they're underpaid because they'll leave the company. You can't have customers who are unhappy because they'll buy from a competitor. You can't have the city that you work in unhappy because they'll fine you, they'll tax you, they'll make your life difficult. So a successful business has always had to take stakeholders into consideration. It's only within the last, say, 3 or 4 decades, probably since the early 1980s, that this idea that stakeholders need to be more specifically catered to by management has become an issue. It started with the philosopher / business management guru Edward Freeman, who took up the mantle of ethics in business, seeing the failure of the Smithian ethics in contemporary business. He offered a new ethical framework, and that ethical framework has become the foundation of what we understand as ESG, stakeholder capitalism, woke capital, etc.
And you take time. I mean, this is not a total financial book. You take time going back to the history of what led up to the present. And it's really a great encapsulation of the cultural history that really led up to this woke stuff. Can you maybe go back to really the beginning and lead the audience up to the present? I mean, that would take a lot of time, but you really did a superb job in outlaying this kind of evolution of these ideas that led to the woke thing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I start the book in 1876 in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins University, where Professor Richard Ely is teaching political economics, and one of his graduate students is Woodrow Wilson. These are, between the two of them, Ely and Wilson, these are the foundational godfathers of American progressivism. They determined together that the way that society is evolving, that Americans need a guardian class. They need a class of experts who understand the world better than the average person does, who will look out for them. They need a professional class that will compensate for the selfishness and the ignorance of the people, to make sure that government, that business, that all of the ruling class institutions make proper decisions rather than decisions that are influenced only by the will of the people. And so what they develop becomes American public administration, which is this idea that we need a bureaucratic class, a professional class of experts that stands between the people and policy and helps to compensate, as I said, for what they saw as the ignorance and the selfishness of the people, and creates a more effective policy. When you hear people in American politics today complain about how government takes too long to do anything, it takes so long, and the filibuster is a problem, and the way that we have to go through all of the rituals to pass laws and to get them enacted and to go. When they complain about that kind of stuff, what they are essentially doing is embracing this idea first promulgated by Ely and Wilson, that government of, by, and for the people is ineffective. And that in order to function in a modern society, we need a government that has the ability to go around the people and to enact policies that are based on the best professional standards rather than on the beliefs of the people.
And scientism, there's the presumption of them using science, even goes through Marx and all these other people too. So I didn't know that much about Wilson, him writing these pieces on administrative government, but you can see that in DC. I mean, if you're in DC too, just these huge administrative bodies supposedly operating for the best of us. But can you talk about how Wilson led to the creature from Jekyll Island?
Right. Well, Woodrow Wilson was a very controversial academic. Many of the things that he said and that he wrote did not sit well with some of the older generation, but he was embraced wholeheartedly by his generation, by the younger generation, who believed that he understood and he alone had sort of this key to understanding political economics and the key to developing a better and more effective country. And so those who were his colleagues helped to further his career several steps along the way. They very powerful classmates of his, very wealthy and very powerful classmates of his, helped to get him to Princeton as a professor, helped to get him into the presidentship of Princeton University, and then helped beyond that to get him into the governorship of New Jersey. As governor of New Jersey, he embraced his governing theory and the idea that of progressivism very wholeheartedly, and in so doing caught the attention of others who were in the same, who were like-minded, who believed in the same things, who thought that perhaps that he could be their savior and the way for them to get the policies that they believed in enacted. And so some of the same classmates, along with a number of very wealthy bankers and very wealthy investment professionals, decided to try and talk Wilson into running for president in 2012. First, they approached Teddy Roosevelt because Roosevelt had been, in fact, the first progressive president. And when they realized that Roosevelt wasn't going to be what they wanted, they decided that he could be a perfect foil to allow them to get the man they wanted, which was Wilson, into the White House. So they encouraged Roosevelt to run as a progressive, to split the Republican vote, and they encouraged Wilson to run as the Democrat. And lo and behold, exactly as they planned, Wilson was elected president as Roosevelt split the Republican vote. Once in office, Wilson got to work on a number of different matters that had been longtime dreams of the investment bankers, of the banking class, of the progressive ruling class. The 16th and 17th Amendments were signed under his watch. And then most notably, he agreed to the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, as you implied with your calling it the monster from Jekyll Island.
The creature, right?
Creature from Jekyll Island. The Federal Reserve was essentially, the idea behind it was created by a small handful of bankers at the resort at Jekyll Island, which was owned by J.P. Morgan, where they had gone and decided what they wanted from a central bank, how they wanted to be able to manage the nation's banking system in order to prevent a number of banking crises that they had seen over the previous couple of decades. And then all they needed was the guy in Washington who'd signed the bill. Wilson was a little bit resistant, in part because he wanted more power for his bureaucracy, more power for his professional class. But in the end, they compromised the bankers, and Wilson created the Federal Reserve specifically to be of, by, and for the big banks, with a little bit of help and a little bit of input from the federal government. So, that was one way that Wilson used circumstances to advance his idea that the public needed institutions that would look out for them, and that the government should be, in large part, in charge of those institutions.
Right. So he thought he was doing the public a favor by putting together the Federal Reserve. He thought that which is, pretty amazing. You still see J.P. Morgan, right, all the way to Jamie Dimon. And then so you have this kind of American progressivism, but then you see this kind of Marxist influenced Frankfurt School kind of also come in. You call, I think, the two streams meet. Can you talk about also the kind of European Marxist influence that kind of led up to the present?
Right. In the early 1920s, particularly in and around Germany, there were a handful of very well-known at the time and very aggressively revolutionary Marxists who were upset by and confused by the fact that the workers of the world did not unite. Under what they saw as Marxist theory, World War I should have been a disaster for the ruling class. The workers in Germany should have looked at the workers in France and the workers in Great Britain and said, you know what, we're not going to fight our brothers. We're not going to fight your wars anymore. We're going to unite and we're going to fight you. When that didn't happen, these Marxists were completely flummoxed. They didn't understand what happened, why that was the case. They didn't understand how to fix it. And so they sat down and they started to put their minds to it. The first and probably best known of these Marxists was the Italian Antonio Gramsci, who truly and earnestly hated the Catholic Church and believed that the Catholic Church was an enormous part of the problem. So Gramsci fought against the fascist government of Mussolini and was continually trying to he was in the parliament in Italy and was the leader of the Communist Party and was continually trying to push Italy toward a communist government. And he was put in prison for his deeds. And while he was in prison, he smuggled out some 3,000 pages of his musings. And what he essentially said was that he believed that the institutions of the West, the cultural institutions, starting with the Catholic Church, but going all the way down into the schools, into the media, into various forms of entertainment, etc., that all of these were essentially dominated by the ruling class, by the bourgeoisie, and that in order for the revolution to take place, in order for the workers to finally realize their own best interest and to unite against the ruling class, they would have to first overturn the culture. They would have to change these institutions. They would have to break this cultural hegemony that the traditionalists, the religious people held, and teach a more effective and a more honest culture to the working class. And once the working class understood who they were, understood what their real culture was, then they could foment the revolution. At the same time as Gramsci was writing these ideas down from his prison cell in Italy, a handful of others, György Lukács in Hungary, was putting together so many of the same views. That the idea is that you had to overturn the existing culture. Lukács and Gramsci's ideas became popular among a number of intellectuals in Germany. And eventually this became the foundation of what would be known as the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School being the primary Marxist intellectual group in Germany and frankly in the West for most of the 20th century. The Frankfurt School embraced this idea that the workers needed to understand better who they truly were, that in order to do so, you needed to undermine the existing culture. They incorporated a little bit of Freud. People don't understand what's going on in their, in their subconscious, et cetera. And they created a new version of the Marxist ideology that focused primarily on culture.
And that was kind of like critical theory, and they kind of grew. They went from Frankfurt, Hitler rises up, they end up all in Colombia during the war, so they're bringing their ideas to the U.S. and seeding them around, and then that kind of grew from there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, generally, historically, I've always made the case that the economic left died in the 1960s. That from the 1960s on, the left as it exists is primarily cultural. But in the West, the economic left pretty much died with World War I. And this switch to a cultural Marxism began immediately thereafter. When the Frankfurt School came to the United States, as you said, they mostly set up shop at Columbia, but probably who would become the most influential of them, Herbert Marcuse, actually went to work for the U.S. government. And he was very much removed from most of the Frankfurt School for the 1940s and then into the 1950s. When the Frankfurt School's leaders decided that they would go back to Frankfurt once they believed that Germany had been cleansed of its Nazi influences and they could go home safely, Marcuse decided to stay. And that's a very important inflection point in the American left, because Marcuse, while associated with the Frankfurt School, was not a part of them originally. He was a latecomer. He didn't stay with them in the United States for very much time. And his primary strength was gaining public attention. He wasn't, an excellent theorist or an excellent writer. He was primarily an excellent gainer of publicity for himself, primarily. And so he offers his ideas on the Cultural Revolution, dealing primarily with a sexual revolution, and then getting into probably his most important work in the 1960s, which was how the concept of tolerance could be turned around to shut down opposition voices. This intolerant tolerance is something that comes from Marcuse and is very much a part of what he advocated for the left to do, to shut down opposition voices in the name of tolerance. So Marcuse becomes sort of the guru of the left in this country, and his cultural ideas take firm hold within the academy and then within various cultural circles by the early 1970s. And you start to see critical theory, as he interpreted it, become a much more important part of all of the humanities by the early 1970s. To the point where by the end of that decade, virtually the entire American academic environment is dominated by this idea that the world is not necessarily as it appears, that there are several realities, that there are external realities that people don't understand, and that once the workers of the world are able to understand these realities by altering the culture, then they can have their revolution. So we had this very radical change in American culture throughout the 1960s and then the 1970s that began to permeate all of the institutions of American culture, from religion to academia to media to entertainment, all down the list. And the only one that stood apart from them was American business.
Right. So they won. Gramsci's long march through the institution won all those spots, and then the last spot is the capital markets or the business community in very large sense. And you kind of break it up. I mean, you talk about in your book, there's two different, you're willing to say the left and the right are players. Can you talk kind of about how these ideas have kind of infiltrated the business community in the present day?
Yeah, sure. As I noted before, the primary mover of these ideas from the humanities to business education and then into the business world more generally is a man named Edward Freeman. And Edward Freeman worked his first job out of graduate school was to work at the management consulting arm of the business school at the University of Pennsylvania. And the interesting thing about Freeman is his PhD wasn't in business, it was in philosophy. So he gets involved in this management training exercise at the University of Pennsylvania, where he meets a handful of fairly radical humanities professors who say, look, we want to democratize the markets. We want to introduce this new ethic that says the markets are for everybody, not just for the rich, not just for the people who own the companies, but for everybody. And so he goes about essentially altering this idea of stakeholder capitalism and turning it into a normative theory, a theory of value, a theory where this becomes the ethical framework of business going forward, where it's not about the shareholders anymore. It's primarily about the stakeholders, not as a practical matter, but as a moral matter, as an ethical matter. And he has enormous influence. His first long treatment of the ethics of stakeholder capitalism, I believe, was in 1984, and from there, the field of stakeholder theory took off and became one of the more dominant theories in American business administration and business ethics in particular. Over the next, ever since, almost 4 decades later, it continues to dominate in the education of American business students. It was only a matter of time, therefore, before some of these students who learned this, some of the students who were taught that their primary responsibility is to the stakeholder rather than the shareholder, started to move into the upper echelons of American business. And that's the point we're at now, where a lot of the CEOs and a lot of the people who direct the human resources departments at companies are very much products of this idea that business exists to serve a social function rather than a business function, rather than the function of the shareholders.
Wow, yeah, it's really incredible how it's changed. Some of that change is definitely there. And you talk about some of these big corporations and how they operate on a global level, really at the kind of the latter part of the book. You talk about Apple, Disney, Amazon. Can you talk maybe just, that's a very important part of the book, but can you kind of, as we're kind of coming to the end, can you talk about how some of those huge multinational corporations have inculcated these woke ideas into their business plans?
Sure. Apple is probably the easiest one to discuss because they're very, very vocal about what they believe are their ethical advantages over their competition, and yet they don't even bother to hide the stuff that clearly contradicts what they're saying. For example, Apple has made the claim over the past several years that they're the greenest company in the world, that they are a zero carbon emissions company, that they have spent considerable amount of money to move beyond fossil fuels, and that the entire company functions without producing any net emissions at all, which is very impressive. And the fact of the matter is that it's true if you talk about Apple Corporation alone. The problem is that the overwhelming majority of energy that is expended in designing, creating, manufacturing, and distributing Apple products is not done by Apple Corporation, but done by contractors that it hires, primarily from Taiwan, who manufacture and distribute from the People's Republic of China, and they are nowhere near carbon neutral. In fact, the companies in the PRC are very much dependent on coal. They're very much dependent on some of the dirtiest energy sources in the world. And they're very, very, very opposite of what Apple would like you to believe that the company is in favor of. So they have this sort of two-faced feature where they are perfectly green in the United States, but the overwhelming majority of their energy is dirty, and it's done in China, and it's something that they believe they can hide from the rest of the world.
Right, and they do that too. With, you mentioned Foxconn and all this stuff. So this public images like Benetton, all these diverse. We're great to all of our employees, but they've got people working for them. Not much. I mean, you talk about people jumping off of buildings, right? So, I mean, that's. Please go.
Yeah, that's another aspect to this. Is I happened to see a story the other day that for the first time in his tenure as CEO, Tim Cook is facing some complaints from employees in the United States, and one of the employees who's singled out in the article is an employee who is deaf. and repeatedly asked over and over and over at the retail store, the Apple retail store where he worked, for a sign language interpreter so that he could do his job. And Apple apparently chose to ignore his requests. And while that's a very serious issue, and that's an issue that people with hearing loss would probably be very sympathetic to. I have a son who has severe hearing loss. And so I feel a certain amount of empathy with this employee. That's nothing compared to what goes on in the Foxconn Apple plants in China. As you said, they had to put up nets over the factory floors at the Foxconn plants to catch the bodies when people jumped off various other floors because they were committing suicide because of how terrible the working conditions are. They live at the plant, they work at the plant, they essentially have no social lives. They're getting paid a fraction of what an American worker would get, and their lives are miserable. And so many of them committed suicide that they decided to put up nets to catch them. That's the way Apple has operated in China. And so the idea that it's now having problems in the United States is fitting and a bit amusing, but it's certainly not surprising.
But that's the way it is for a lot of these corporations, Nike and stuff like that. They have these great kind of advertisements. We're woke, but they're operating in a country that's using Uyghur labor and all kinds of stuff that's really bad. And there's other woke things going on. It's Disney, Google's had problems. It was interesting. Coinbase recently went public, and their CEO tried to address this woke by saying no politics at work. We're going to be apolitical, which really made a lot of people really angry too, because they really wanted to. So the politicization is not just happening at the top level, it's happening among the employees as well. So it's really a remarkable phenomenon. People need to keep an eye out for that. But
Yeah,
where's anything you'd like? We're about 40 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add or finish up with, or anything that I missed?
Well, I was just going to say, in response to your last comment, generally speaking, we always say that the pressure to be woke on corporations comes from three directions. It comes from the bottom up, which is employees. CEOs aren't the only ones who go to business school and learn that you should be woke as part of your professional life. Employees do too. We see this a lot, particularly at the tech companies like Facebook and Google, where the employees push management in a very politically leftward direction. A lot of the pressure comes from the top down. You look at Bob Iger at Disney, you look at Tim Cook at Apple, you look at Jeff Bezos at Amazon. These are very woke people who are pushing woke ideas. And then pressure comes from the outside in. And that's activist investors and primarily activist institutional investors, large asset managers. Getting back to Larry Fink from the introduction to the book, that's where he has his influence. It's from the outside in, pressuring these companies to behave in a certain way or to lose his investment or to run the risk of having him fight management and directors in the annual corporate meetings.
Right. Yeah. No, this is a really important book. I highly recommend people go check that out. Where's the best place where people can go purchase this book?
Well, you can get it anywhere. You can get it on Amazon if you like. I would prefer everybody get it from Encounter Books, encounterbooks.com, my publisher, because they don't have the same woke capital contradictions that Amazon does.
Right. And then do you have a website or social media if anybody wants to reach out to you? Are you on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at The Paul Forum, at The Paul Forum. And then our website.
Sorry, the Paul, Paul Forum, is that correct?
No, POL, political.
Paul Forum.
POL, Paul Forum. And then I can also be found at wokecapital.org.
Wokecapital.org. And again, the title of the book is The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, How Political Correctness Captured Big Business. There's a lot more information in here, guys. Highly recommend you get this book. Very important to understand, especially if you're in the corporate world or in the business world, what's going to happen or what's happening really right now. And again, the author's name is Stephen R. Soukup, published February 2021. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, William. I appreciate it.
All right, take care. Stay there. All right, that was perfect.